The quantum comm array aboard the ESS Hyperion lit up like a Christmas tree, startling Captain Sarah Chen from her routine system check. The message that crawled across her neural interface made her blood run cold. URGENT. To all sentient species, the Concordat requires immediate assistance. This is not a diplomatic request. This is a plea for survival. The irony wasn't lost on her. Just 15 years ago, the Concordat had dismissed humanity as dangerously unpredictable primitives, refusing Earth's application to join their grand alliance of spacefaring civilizations. Now they were begging for help from those same primitives. "Analysis complete, Captain," reported Lieutenant Rodriguez, his fingers dancing across the holographic interface. "The message is authenticated. It's coming from the Concordat's capital world, Luminaris Prime. Or rather," he paused, double-checking his readings, "where Luminaris Prime used to be." Sarah leaned forward in her command chair, the smart fabric automatically adjusting to support her new posture. "Explain." "The quantum signature is correct, but the coordinates show nothing but debris where their capital should be. Long-range scans are picking up crystalline formations throughout the debris field. They're like nothing we've ever seen before." The bridge fell silent. Luminaris Prime had been a marvel of engineering, a Dyson swarm of interconnected habitats housing over 30 billion sentient beings from 100 different species. If it had fallen, "Display the full message," Sarah ordered, her augmented eyes automatically adjusting to the sudden burst of light as the hologram expanded to fill the bridge's main viewport. The figure that appeared was barely recognizable as First Speaker Vental, the same Concordat leader who had sneered at humanity's primitive reliance on biological redundancies during their membership application. Now his crystalline form was cracked, golden energy leaking from multiple fissures. They came without warning. Vental's message began, his usually melodic voice distorted by static. "The crystal tide. Our sensors didn't detect them until they were already inside our defense perimeter. Our quantum shields, our phase cannons, everything we believed made us invincible. They simply ignored them all." The message continued, showing scenes of destruction that made even veteran officers flinch. Massive crystalline ships, their surfaces refracting starlight in impossible ways, methodically harvesting entire worlds. The Concordat's most advanced weapons disappeared into their faceted surfaces without effect. "We were wrong," Vental continued, his voice heavy with regret. "We dismissed Earth because you relied on what we considered outdated technology, ballistic weapons, armor plating, backup systems that could operate without power. We called you primitives because you planned for failure rather than trusting in the perfection of your technology." Sarah exchanged glances with her XO, Commander Jackson. They both knew where this was going. "The crystal tide doesn't operate by any rules we understand. Our quantum-encrypted networks, they broke them in hours. Our AI defense systems turned against us in minutes. But we've noticed something. The few successful evacuations, the handful of colonies that have survived, they all had one thing in common. They used technology you would recognize. Simple radio communications, chemical rockets, physical barriers." The message crackled with interference, Vental's form flickering. "We estimate we have lost 60% of our territory. Our remaining forces are falling back to the Corona worlds. But it won't be enough. We need..." Static overwhelmed the transmission for a moment. "We need the primitives who never forgot how to fight the old way. We need humans." The message ended with a data burst containing coordinates for a rendezvous point, along with technical data on the crystal tide that made Sarah's tactical implants tingle with possibilities. "Orders, Captain?" Commander Jackson asked, already knowing the answer. Sarah stood, her cybernetic leg whirring softly as she turned to face her crew. "Alert Fleet Command. Tell them we're looking at a Class 1 xenocide event, and send a response to any Concordat forces that can still receive. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth Space Service. The primitives are coming to help." As the Hyperion's quantum drive spooled up for the jump to the rendezvous coordinates, Sarah couldn't help but smile grimly. The Concordat was about to learn why humanity had never abandoned its primitive ways. In a universe where anything could go wrong, the species that survived weren't the ones with the most advanced technology. They were the ones who knew how to keep fighting when that technology failed. The real question was, would the Concordat's pride allow them to accept help from the primitives they had once spurned? And more importantly, would that help come in time to save what remained of their civilization from the crystal tide? All hands, Sarah's voice echoed through the ship's comm system. Battle stations. We're about to show the galaxy why humanity never puts all its eggs in one basket. The Hyperion vanished into quantum space, carrying with it humanity's first official response to a galactic crisis. The primitives were going to war, and they were bringing every outdated weapon and tactic they had kept sharp over the centuries. The crystal tide was about to learn why Earth had been classified as a death world, and why its children had survived everything the universe had thrown at them. The war for survival was about to begin, and humanity's supposed weaknesses might just prove to be the galaxy's greatest strength. The Concordat delegation's arrival at Earth's Lunar Defense Station was a sight that would have been unthinkable just months ago. Their ships, or what remained of them, were barely holding together, their once pristine hulls now patchworked with emergency repairs and makeshift shields. Captain Chen watched from the observation deck as the vessels limped into dock, their quantum drives sputtering and failing in ways that made her engineering team wince. They've retrofitted physical armor plates onto quantum phase hulls, Chief Engineer Patel observed, his augmented vision zooming in on the modifications. Looks like they've been learning the hard way. The delegation that emerged from the lead ship was a far cry from the proud ambassadors who had dismissed Earth years ago. First Speaker Vental's crystalline form was held together by crude metal braces, and his entourage of various species moved with the weary caution of those who had seen too much death. "Welcome to Luna Base," Sarah greeted them, carefully modulating her voice to avoid causing vibrations that might stress Vental's damaged form. "We received your distress call, Captain Chen." Vental's voice was rougher than in his transmission, the damage to his crystalline body affecting his speech. "Your hospitality is appreciated. Though I admit, I never thought I would stand here." "Things change," Sarah replied simply, leading them toward the conference room. She noticed how the delegates' eyes widened at the sight of physical buttons and mechanical locks alongside the advanced interfaces. "We've prepared environments suitable for each of your species' needs." The conference room was a testament to human preparedness. While it featured cutting-edge holographic displays and quantum computers, there were also hardened backup systems, manual controls, and even paper documents. Redundancies that the Concordat had once mocked as signs of primitive paranoia. "The crystal tide has taken 68% of our territory." Vental began without preamble once they were seated. "Our remaining populations are scattered across 47 emergency colonies." He paused, his crystalline features shifting in what Sarah recognized as deep shame. "We need humanity's help." Sarah activated the main display, showing the tactical data they'd gathered. "Tell us everything you know about them. Leave nothing out, even details you think are irrelevant." What followed was a devastating account of technological hubris meeting its match. The crystal tide hadn't just defeated the Concordat's defenses, they had turned the advanced civilization's greatest achievements against them. Quantum networks became weapons of mass confusion. AI defense systems became turncoats. Even their vaunted phase shift technology, which allowed ships to slip between dimensions, had proven worse than useless. "We believe they're a silicon-based collective consciousness," one of the scientific advisors explained, her gaseous form swirling with agitation. "They don't just ignore our energy weapons, they feed on them. Every quantum-based attack makes them stronger." "But you've had some successes," Commander Jackson prompted. "Your message mentioned survivors using older technology." "Yes," Vental admitted. "The colonies that survived were mostly research outposts and mining facilities. places we considered too primitive to upgrade with our latest technology. They used radio waves instead of quantum communication, physical weapons instead of energy beams. Their very backwardness saved them. Sarah shared a knowing look with her officers. It's not backwardness, first speaker. It's pragmatism. Humanity learned long ago that the more advanced the technology, the more catastrophic its failure could be. That's why we never abandoned the basics. She stood and walked to a manual star chart mounted on the wall, an antique that had drawn confused stares from the delegates. Show us where the crystal tide is now, and where you predict they'll strike next. As Ventil began marking positions, Sarah's tactical implants were already running calculations. The crystal tide's advance wasn't random. They were systematically targeting the most technologically advanced regions first, leaving the less developed areas for later. We can help you, Sarah said finally, but there needs to be a fundamental change in how the Concordat operates. No more technological elitism. No more dismissing solutions because they're not quantum-based or AI-driven. You're asking us to abandon generations of progress, one of the delegates protested. No, Sarah corrected. I'm asking you to expand your definition of progress, to understand that sometimes the old ways work best, and most importantly, she met each delegate's eyes in turn. I'm asking you to trust the primitives who never forgot that the universe doesn't care about elegance, only survival. Ventil was silent for a long moment, his damaged form reflecting the room's lights in fractured patterns. Finally, he bowed. A gesture that would have been unthinkable from a Concordat leader just months ago. We submit to your wisdom in this matter, he said formally. What do you propose? Sarah smiled and activated a hologram showing Earth's combined fleet. It was a striking mix of technologies. Sleek quantum ships alongside bulky armored cruisers, AI-driven fighters next to manually piloted bombers. First, we're going to teach you something humanity learned a long time ago. Never bring just one kind of weapon to a fight. And then, she highlighted a sector of space where the crystal tide's advance had been particularly devastating. Then we're going to show them why underestimating primitives is always a fatal mistake. The war room erupted into activity as human and Concordat officers began integrating their forces. The price of pride had been steep, but perhaps its payment would buy something even more valuable. A future where wisdom wasn't measured by the complexity of one's technology, but by the ability to use every tool at one's disposal. The real question was whether they could implement these changes in time to stop the crystal tide's advance, and more importantly, whether the Concordat could truly learn to fight alongside the primitives they had once despised. The combined fleet hung in the darkness of space above the Centauri drift, a sight that would have been impossible just months ago. Human warships, their hulls a practical mix of armor plating and energy shielding, flew in formation alongside the remaining Concordat vessels, now modified with what their crews had once considered primitive technology. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the Hyperion's bridge, watching the tactical display as the final ships took their positions. Status report. All ships in position, Captain. Lieutenant Rodriguez reported. The Concordat crews are adapting to the new systems, some better than others. That was an understatement. Teaching the Concordat forces to use physical weapons and manual backup systems had been like teaching quantum physics to Stone Age warriors, in reverse. Many had initially refused to even touch what they considered crude implements, until demonstrations proved their effectiveness against the Crystal Tide. The Crystal Tide fleet has been detected approaching the Helios colony, Commander Jackson announced. 6 capital ships, multiple smaller vessels. Standard harvest formation. Sarah nodded. This was it, the first major test of their integrated strategy. Signal all ships. Operation Thunderstrike is go. The plan was audacious, combining human ingenuity with Concordat technology in ways neither side had imagined possible. As the Crystal Tide ships approached, their crystalline surfaces refracting starlight in mesmerizing patterns, the combined fleet remained hidden behind a field of space debris, another primitive tactic that the Concordat had to be convinced to try. Enemy ships entering range. Rodriguez reported. "They're scanning with quantum sensors and finding nothing, just as predicted." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The Crystal Tide had grown accustomed to fighting an enemy that relied entirely on quantum technology. They weren't looking for ships hidden by simple physical obstacles and basic sensor baffling. "Launch the first wave," she ordered. From the debris field erupted a swarm of what appeared to be primitive missiles, simple ballistic weapons that the Crystal Tide had never bothered to defend against. But these weren't ordinary missiles. Each one contained a core of Concordat quantum technology, modified according to human principles of redundancy and survivability. The Crystal Tide responded as expected, their energy absorption fields activating to feed on what they assumed would be another quantum attack. Instead, the missiles detonated in a carefully orchestrated sequence, creating a web of interference patterns that played havoc with the crystalline ship's molecular structure. "Direct hits," Rodriguez called out. "Their formation is disrupting. They're trying to adapt, but they can't handle the overlapping frequency patterns." "Signal the Concordat heavy cruisers," Sarah commanded. "Begin Phase 2. The Concordat ships emerged from hiding, their newly installed railguns firing in perfect synchronization. Physical projectiles, accelerated to relativistic speeds by a combination of human and Concordat technology, struck the Crystal Tide ships while their structure was still destabilized by the missile barrage. The effect was devastating. Crystalline surfaces that could shrug off quantum weapons shattered under the impact of simple kinetic force, amplified by the resonance patterns still echoing through their molecular matrices. Multiple direct hits, 3 enemy capital ships showing critical damage. 4, 5. But the Crystal Tide hadn't conquered most of the Concordat by being predictable. The remaining ships began to change, their crystalline structures flowing like liquid glass as they adapted to the attack. Energy beams lashed out, not at the ships, but at the debris field itself, converting it into a cloud of crystalline shrapnel. "All ships, execute evasive pattern Delta," Sarah ordered calmly. This too had been anticipated. "Launch second wave. Activate the sonic disruptors." This was where human stubbornness had truly paid off. Despite the Concordat's insistence that sound couldn't propagate in space, human engineers had found a way to transmit vibrations through the crystalline particles now floating between the fleets. The Crystal Tide had turned the debris into a weapon, and in doing so, had created the perfect conductor for their own destruction. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The crystalline ships began to vibrate, their attempts to adapt to one frequency making them vulnerable to others. Where they tried to become fluid, they shattered. Where they attempted to become rigid, they cracked. "Enemy fleet is in full retreat," Rodriguez reported, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. "Confirmed destruction of 4 capital ships, severe damage to the remaining 2. Smaller vessels are. They're disintegrating." A cheer went up across the bridge, quickly echoed by the rest of the fleet. But Sarah remained focused on the tactical display. "Maintain battle stations," she ordered. "Launch recovery drones to collect debris samples. I want to know everything we can learn from this encounter." As the cleanup began, Sarah received a transmission from Ventol's ship. The first speaker's crystalline face showed an expression she had never seen before, humility mixed with hope. "Captain Chen," he said, his voice carrying across the quantum link. "We've, that is." He seemed to be struggling with the words. "Your tactics were most effective." Coming from a Concordat leader, this was practically effusive praise. "The combination of our technologies was effective," Sarah corrected diplomatically. "Your quantum cores provided the precision we needed. Our physical delivery systems provided the punch." "Yes," Ventol agreed. Perhaps there is much more we can learn from each other." Sarah's response was interrupted by a priority alert. New contacts were appearing at the edge of their sensor range, a massive Crystal Tide fleet, far larger than anything they had encountered before. "All ships," Sarah's voice carried across the combined fleet, "form up on new coordinates. The real battle is about to begin." As the fleet moved to engage, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on the irony. The crystal tide had forced the most advanced civilization in the galaxy to embrace primitive technology, and in doing so, had created something far more dangerous than either civilization had been alone. The question now was whether this first victory was repeatable on a larger scale, and whether the Concordat's newfound respect for human methods would survive the coming storm. The crystal tide was about to learn that they had accomplished something unprecedented. They had united the pragmatic primitives with the technological elite, creating a force that combined the best of both worlds. And that force was coming for them. Deep within the retrofitted laboratories of Luna Base, Dr. Maya Patel stared at the crystalline fragment floating in the containment field, her augmented eyes recording every subtle change in its structure. Around her, a mixed team of human and Concordat scientists worked in an unlikely fusion of technologies: quantum scanners alongside analog seismographs, AI analysis systems next to mechanical testing rigs. "Play it again," she instructed. "Full spectrum this time." The lab's speakers began emitting a complex series of tones, carefully calibrated to match the resonant frequencies they'd discovered during Operation Thunderstrike. The crystal fragment vibrated, its molecular structure shifting in ways that the most advanced Concordat sensors had never detected. "By the first light," breathed Dr. Excelthor, his gaseous form swirling in agitation. "They're not just crystals. They're singing." Maya nodded, her neural implants processing the data streams. "Not just singing. They're talking. The entire crystal tide is one vast communication network, but not quantum-based like we thought. They're using vibrations, mechanical waves propagated through their crystalline structure." The discovery had come from an unlikely source, a junior engineer who played classical music in the lab during the night shift. The crystal samples had responded to certain frequencies, leading to a breakthrough that neither human nor Concordat science could have achieved alone. Aboard the ES of Hyperion, Captain Chen received the preliminary report with growing excitement. "They're using sound waves. More precisely, they're using crystalline structures to transmit and amplify mechanical vibrations," Maya's hologram explained. "Their entire consciousness exists as patterns of resonance. That's why they were able to ignore quantum shields and energy weapons. They operate on completely different principles. And that's why our sonic attacks were so effective." Commander Jackson added, the pieces falling into place. "We weren't just damaging their ships. We were disrupting their ability to think." The tactical implications were enormous. The crystal tide wasn't invincible. They had simply been operating on a level that the Concordat's reliance on quantum technology had never detected. It took humanity's primitive understanding of mechanical waves to reveal their true nature. "There's more," Maya continued. "We've analyzed their attack patterns. They're not just harvesting worlds. They're looking for something. Specific resonance patterns in planetary cores. We think they're trying to recreate something they lost. A homeworld, maybe, or a central consciousness." Sarah's tactical implants were already calculating new strategies. "Can we use this? Create false signals to lure them into a trap?" "Better," Maya's hologram smiled. "We can talk to them." The revelation sent shockwaves through both fleets. The Concordat's remaining leaders were stunned to learn that the enemy they'd been fighting wasn't simply a mindless force of destruction, but a complex civilization operating on principles they'd been too technologically advanced to understand. First Speaker Vental, his crystalline form now properly repaired using a combination of Concordat and human medical techniques, addressed the Emergency Council. "We were blind," he admitted. "In our pursuit of quantum mastery, we forgot the fundamental forces that shaped our own evolution. It took these remarkable humans to show us what we'd overlooked." Sarah stood at the council chamber's window, watching Earth rotate slowly below. "The question is, what do we do with this knowledge? The crystal tide has already destroyed dozens of worlds. They may be willing to communicate, but that doesn't make them any less dangerous." "Perhaps," said Dr. Excelthor, "that is why the universe guided us to each other. The Concordat has the technological sophistication to transmit complex quantum signals across vast distances. Humans have the understanding of mechanical principles needed to encode those signals in ways the crystal tide can comprehend. Together we might be able to end this war without further genocide. Sarah finished. But we need to move fast. The crystal tide fleet we detected after Operation Thunderstrike is still coming, and it's larger than anything we faced before. The next few days were a blur of activity. Human acoustic engineers worked alongside Concordat quantum specialists, creating a hybrid communication system unlike anything either civilization had conceived. They were in a race against time, trying to establish contact with an alien consciousness that operated on principles they were only beginning to understand. But even as they worked, the tactical situation grew more dire. The Crystal Tide fleet was approaching rapidly, its numbers far greater than their initial estimates. They would reach the Sol system in less than a week. "We need more time," Maya reported, frustration evident in her voice. "The translation matrices aren't stable yet. If we try to communicate now, we could make things worse." Sarah studied the tactical projections, her augmented mind running through scenarios. They couldn't retreat. Earth would be vulnerable. They couldn't fight. The fleet was too large, which left only one option, one that would require both human courage and Concordat technology to achieve. "What if we don't need a perfect translation?" she asked slowly. "What if we just need to get their attention?" She turned to Ventil, who had been quietly observing. "First speaker, how quickly can your engineers modify our entire fleet's quantum cores to emit synchronized resonance patterns?" Ventil's crystalline features shifted in surprise as he grasped her plan. "You want to turn our entire fleet into one massive transmitter. The power requirements would be enormous, and potentially fatal to the crews," Commander Jackson added grimly. "Even with our best shielding, that much vibration in close quarters. Better than certain death," Sarah countered. "We have 6 days to figure out how to scream loudly enough that the crystal tide has to stop and listen." As the combined fleet began its modifications, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on how far they'd come. Humans and the Concordat, working together to solve a problem neither could handle alone. The crystal tide had forced them to understand each other, to recognize that true strength lay not in technological advancement or primitive resilience, but in the wisdom to know when to use each. The question was whether this understanding had come in time, and whether their desperate plan would give them a chance to prove it. The next 6 days would determine not just the fate of Earth or the Concordat, but perhaps the future of all intelligent life in the galaxy. The hidden strength they'd discovered wasn't just in the weakness of their enemy. It was in their own ability to change, to adapt, and to work together. Now they had to prove that this strength was enough to save them all. The combined fleet hung in formation at the edge of the Sol system, every ship modified far beyond its original design. Quantum cores pulsed in sync with mechanical resonators, creating a harmony of technologies that would have been unthinkable months ago. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the Hyperion's bridge, watching the tactical display as the massive Crystal Tide fleet approached. "All ships report ready," Commander Jackson announced, his voice tight with tension. "Though I use the term ready loosely, we're about to do something that violates about a dozen fundamental engineering principles." "Status of the resonance arrays?" Sarah asked, ignoring the comment. They were well past worrying about engineering principles now. "Operating at 94% synchronization." Maya's voice came through the comm. "The Concordat ships are having trouble maintaining the lower frequencies, but they're compensating with quantum harmonics. It's not pretty, but it should work." Should work. The fate of 2 civilizations resting on those 2 words. The Crystal Tide fleet was now visible to the naked eye, a vast swarm of crystalline structures that filled the viewport with shifting patterns of refracted starlight. "They're not slowing down," Rodriguez reported from Tactical. "No response to standard hailing frequencies." Sarah took a deep breath. "All ships, commence Operation Resonance." "Maya, begin the transmission." The entire fleet began to vibrate as one, every ship becoming part of a vast instrument designed to play a single, complex message. The hybrid communication system they developed channeled the combined power of human acoustic engineering and concordat quantum technology into a wave of mechanical energy that rippled through space. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then the Crystal Tide fleet began to change. The massive crystalline ships started shifting, their structures flowing like liquid glass as they responded to the vibrations. Energy spike. Rodriguez called out, "There!" The universe seemed to sing. The Crystal Tide fleet erupted in a display of light and sound that overwhelmed even the most sophisticated sensors. Patterns of resonance cascaded between their ships, creating harmonics that human and concordat scientists had never imagined possible. "They're responding." Maya's excited voice cut through the chaos. "The patterns, they're similar to what we transmitted, but far more complex. Running them through the translation matrix now." Suddenly, the main viewport filled with a new kind of display, not visual or quantum, but a representation of pure resonance patterns translated into forms their minds could comprehend. The Crystal Tide was speaking. "We, here." The translation was crude, more concept than language. Long silence. Finally, hearing. Sarah exchanged glances with Vental, who had insisted on being present for this moment. The first speaker's crystalline form vibrated subtly in response to the communication. "We are ready to listen." Sarah transmitted back, the fleet's hybrid systems converting her words into resonance patterns. "Why have you attacked our worlds?" The response came in waves of harmonic complexity that threatened to overwhelm their translation systems. "Searching for the song. Home song lost. Silence. Unbearable. Your worlds. Wrong frequencies. Trying to rebuild the song." Understanding dawned across both human and concordat minds. The Crystal Tide wasn't an invasion force. They were refugees, searching for a way to recreate their lost homeland, destroying worlds in desperate attempts to find the right resonance patterns. "We can help you find a new home," Sarah transmitted. "One that doesn't require destroying other civilizations. We understand now what you need." There was a pause in the crystalline patterns. "Help. Possible. So long. Alone. Only silence." Together, Vental added his own transmission, his crystalline nature allowing him to create harmonics impossible for humans. "Our knowledge of quantum mechanics, human understanding of mechanical principles, we can help you create a new song." The next hours were a blur of communication and calculation. The Crystal Tide shared the resonance patterns they were seeking, specific frequencies that could support their crystalline consciousness. Human acoustic engineers and concordat quantum physicists worked together, identifying potential solar systems where those frequencies naturally occurred. "There," Maya finally announced, highlighting a sector of space well away from populated worlds. "A system with 5 gas giants in harmonic orbit. The gravitational waves they produce, they're almost exactly what the Crystal Tide needs, with some quantum manipulation of the resonance patterns." The Crystal Tide's response was immediate and overwhelming. A symphony of joy that made every crystal in the fleet ring with sympathy. Sarah felt something she hadn't expected. "Hope. We can escort you there," she transmitted. "Help you establish your new home. In return, we ask for peace and for your help in understanding your technology. Together, we can ensure no other species faces the loss you experienced." The agreement that followed wasn't a traditional treaty. It was written in resonance patterns, authenticated by quantum signatures, and witnessed by representatives of 3 very different approaches to existence. The Crystal Tide would have their new home. The Concordat would learn to look beyond quantum technology, and humanity would share their unique perspective with both. As the combined fleet prepared to escort the Crystal Tide to their new home, Sarah stood with Vental in the Hyperion's observation deck. "We were wrong about so many things," the first speaker said quietly. "We thought advancement meant abandoning the fundamental in favor of the complex. We never understood that true wisdom lies in knowing when to use each." Sarah watched the Crystal Tide fleet falling into formation alongside their own. No longer enemies, but fellow travelers in a universe far stranger and more wonderful than anyone had imagined. "That's humanity's greatest strength," she replied. "Not our technology, not our resilience, but our ability to see value in every approach. We keep the old ways alongside the new, not because we're primitive, but because we understand that every tool has its purpose." As the massive fleet began its journey, Sarah couldn't help but smile at the sight of human warships, Concordat cruisers, and Crystal Tide vessels all traveling together. They were no longer the primitives, the elites, and the destroyers. They were simply three different species discovering that their differences made them stronger together than they ever could have been apart. The future would bring new challenges, new discoveries, and new opportunities for cooperation. But for now, they had achieved something remarkable. They had found strength in their differences, wisdom in their combinations, and hope in their willingness to learn from each other. The stars stretched out before them, full of possibilities, as humanity took its place as guardians not just of their own future, but of a new era of galactic cooperation. They had proved that true advancement wasn't about abandoning the old or blindly embracing the new. It was about having the wisdom to know when to use each, and the courage to bring them together in ways no one had imagined possible.